Chapter 8 of Breaching the Marianas, The Battle for Saipan by John C. Chapin. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. D+24, 9 July. It was to be the final day of a long, grueling campaign. The 6th and 8th Marines came down from the hills to the last western beaches, while the 4th Marine Division, with the 2nd Marines attached, reached Marpy Point, the northern end of the island. There a final drama of horror was played out. Lieutenant Colonel Chambers watched, amazed. During this day, as we moved along the cliffs and caves, we uncovered civilians all the time. The Jap soldiers would not surrender, and would not permit the civilians to surrender. I saw with my own eyes women, some carrying children, come out of the caves and start toward our lines. They'd be shot down by their own people. I watched any number of women carrying children come down to the cliffs that dropped to the ocean. They were very steep, very precipitous. The women would come down and throw the children into the ocean and jump in and commit suicide. I watched one group at a distance of perhaps 100 yards. About 8 or 10 civilian men, women, and children get into a little huddle and blow themselves up. It was a sad and terrible thing, and yet I presume quite consistent with the Japanese rules of Bushido. Lieutenant Stott in that same division witnessed other unbelievable forms of self-destruction. Interpreters were summoned, and they pleaded by amplifier for the civilians to come forward and surrender. No movement followed. The people drew closer together into a compact mass. It was still predominantly civilians, but several in uniform could be distinguished circling about in the throng and using the civilians for protection. As they huddled closer, sounds of a weird singing chant carried up to us. Suddenly, a waving flag of the rising sun was unfurled. Movement grew more agitated. Men started leaping into the sea, and the chanting gave way to startled cries, and with them the popping sound of detonating grenades. It was the handful of soldiers, determined to prevent the surrender or escape of their kinfolk, who tossed grenades into the milling throng of men, women, and children, and then dived into the sea from which escape was impossible. The exploding grenades cut the mob into patches of dead, dying, and wounded, and for the first time we actually saw water that ran red with human blood. With this kind of fanaticism characterizing the Japanese, it is not surprising that 23,811 of the enemy were known dead, with uncounted thousands of others charred by flamethrowers and sealed forever in their caves. Only 736 prisoners of war were taken, and of these 438 were Koreans. American casualties numbered 3,225 killed in action, 13,061 wounded in action, and 326 missing in action. The island was officially declared secured at 16:15 on 9 July, although mopping up continued afterwards. The 4th Marine Division was later awarded the Presidential Unit Citation for its outstanding performance in combat on Saipan and its subsequent assault on the neighboring island of Tinian. Sidebars. Medal of Honor recipients. Private First Class Harold Christ Agerholm was born on 29 January 1925 in Racine, Wisconsin. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty while serving with the 4th Battalion 10th Marines, 2nd Marine Division, in action against enemy Japanese forces on Saipan, Marianas Islands, 7 July 1944. When the enemy launched a fierce, determined counterattack against our positions and overran a neighboring artillery battalion, Private First Class Agerholm immediately volunteered to assist in the effort to check the hostile attack and evacuate our wounded. Locating and appropriating an abandoned ambulance jeep, he repeatedly made extremely perilous trips under heavy rifle and mortar fire and single-handedly loaded and evacuated approximately 45 casualties, working tirelessly and with utter disregard for his own safety during a grueling period of more than 3 hours. Despite intense, persistent enemy fire, he ran out to aid 2 men whom he believed to be wounded Marines, but was himself mortally wounded by a Japanese sniper while carrying out his hazardous mission. Private First Class Agerholm's brilliant initiative, great personal valor, and self-sacrificing efforts in the face of almost certain death reflect the highest credit upon himself and the United States Naval Service. He gallantly gave his life for his country. Private First Class Harold Glenn Epperson was born on 14 July 1923 in Akron, Ohio. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty while serving with the 1st Battalion, 6th Marines, 2nd Marine Division, in action against enemy Japanese forces on the island of Saipan in the Marianas on 25 July 1944. With his machine gun emplacement bearing the full brunt of a fanatic assault initiated by the Japanese under cover of pre-dawn darkness, Private First Class Epperson manned his weapon with determined aggressiveness, fighting furiously in the defense of his battalion's position and maintaining a steady stream of devastating fire against rapidly infiltrating hostile troops to aid in breaking the abortive attack. Suddenly, a Japanese soldier, assumed to be dead, sprang up and hurled a powerful hand grenade into the emplacement. Determined to save his comrades, Private First Class Epperson unhesitatingly chose to sacrifice himself and, diving upon the deadly missile, absorbed the shattering violence of the exploding charge in his own body. Stout-hearted and indomitable in the face of certain death, Private First Class Epperson fearlessly yielded his own life that his able comrades might carry on. His superb valor and unfaltering devotion to duty throughout reflect the highest credit upon himself and upon the United States Naval Service. He gallantly gave his life for his country. Sergeant Grant Frederick Timmerman was born on 14 February 1919 in Americus, Kansas. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty as tank commander serving with the 2nd Battalion, 6th Marines, 2nd Marine Division, during action against enemy Japanese forces on Saipan, Marianas Islands on 8 July 1944. Advancing with his tank a few yards ahead of the infantry in support of a vigorous attack on hostile positions, Sergeant Timmerman maintained steady fire from his anti-aircraft Sky-Mount machine gun until progress was impeded by a series of enemy trenches and pillboxes. Observing a target of opportunity, he immediately ordered the tank stopped and, mindful of the danger from the muzzle blast as he prepared to open fire with the 75 mm, fearlessly stood up in the exposed turret and ordered the infantry to hit the deck. Quick to act as a grenade, hurled by the Japanese, was about to drop into the open turret hatch, Sergeant Timmerman unhesitatingly blocked the opening with his body, holding the grenade against his chest and taking the brunt of the explosion. His exceptional valor and loyalty in saving his men at the cost of his own life reflect the highest credit upon Sergeant Timmerman and the United States Naval Service. He gallantly gave his life for his country. Navy Chaplains. Two types of non-combatants are attached to Marine units: members of the Navy Medical Corps and Navy Chaplain Corps. Whenever the Marines are in combat, they are well tended to in body and soul on the front lines. Navy Lieutenant John H. Craven, Chaplain Corps, earned the Bronze Star for his actions under fire on Saipan. Later, he summarized activities. In combat, our main action was to go from place to place, unit to unit, and start out early in the morning and go till dark, just visiting one unit after the other, and many times just have a very brief service. We had some very small hymn books and some testaments I could carry in my map case, and we would just gather a few men together in a bomb crater or defilade, and I would have one service after the other. Sometimes we had 12, 13, or 14 of those in one day, especially on Sunday. Then we had to take our turn at the cemetery. Each chaplain from different units would go down and take his turn for burial. We had a brief committal service for each one as they brought the bodies in, and I set myself up to try to keep up with all of the men of our units, where they were, whether they were in the hospital. I worked closely with a sergeant major, and it was amazing how we were able to keep up with men, and when they were killed, and when and where they were buried. Craven kept a notebook listing all the casualties, and he would keep that current from day to day. Each evening he would compare notes with the regimental sergeant major. It was a help to any chaplain to know who were casualties and where, and to report and work with their friends, and it was also a help to the sergeant major because it verified reports he got. When Chaplain Craven and other chaplains returned to the rear areas with their units, they started writing letters to the families of everyone who was killed in the regiment, and added their letters to those the commanding officers were required to write. One other regimental chaplain used a special type of ministration. He had a canvas gas mask carrier slung over each shoulder. In one carrier he had Scotch whiskey, and the other fried chicken. As he knelt by each young, frightened, wounded Marine, he was invariably asked, "Am I going to be okay?" "Sure you are," was the cheerful answer. "While you are waiting to be evacuated, would you rather have a drumstick or a wing?" The young Marine would be so surprised he would forget about himself. Then, when the chaplain asked if he wanted to wash it down with a swig of scotch, he couldn't believe he was hearing correctly amidst all the confusion, noise, and death all around him. A young doctor, hearing about this chaplain, said, "That man probably saved more young lives from dying of shock than will ever be known." Saipan's legacy. The campaign on Saipan had brought many American casualties, and it also heralded the kind of fighting which would be experienced in subsequent operations in the Central and Western Pacific in the days that lay ahead in the Pacific War. Holland Smith declared it the decisive battle of the Pacific Offensive, for it opened the way to the home islands. Japanese General Saito had written that the fate of the empire will be decided in this one action. A Japanese admiral agreed. Our war was lost with the loss of Saipan. It had truly been a strategic strike for the United States. The proof of these fundamental judgments was dramatized 4 months later when 100 B-29 bombers took off from Saipan bound for Tokyo. There were other fateful results. The United States now had a secure advanced naval base for further punishing strikes close to enemy shores. Emperor Hirohito was now forced to consider a diplomatic settlement of the war. The militaristic General Tojo, the premier, and his entire cabinet fell from power on 18 July, 9 days after Saipan's loss. The lessons learned in this campaign would be observed in future American operations, as flaws were analyzed and corrected. The clear need to improve aviation support for the ground troops led directly to the better results in the Philippine Islands and on Iwo Jima and Okinawa. The artillery spotting missions flown by VMO 2 and 4 set a pattern for the use of light planes in the future. Naval gunfire support was also closely reviewed. General Saito had written, "If there just were no naval gunfire, we feel we could fight it out with the enemy in a decisive battle." While more than 8,500 tons of ammunition were fired by U.S. Navy ships, the flat trajectory of the naval guns proved somewhat limiting, as the shells didn't have the plunging and penetrating effect which was needed against Japanese strongholds. Finally, there were lessons learned from the supply confusion that had marred the early days on the beaches and hadn't improved much since the days of the Guadalcanal landing. Logistic problems had arisen because, once a beach was in friendly hands, the ships were unloaded as rapidly as possible, and the sailors in the landing craft were in a hurry to get into the beaches and back out again. Supplies were spread all over the beach, partly because of the enemy's artillery and mortar harassing fire on the beaches, but also because of the Corps' hard-driving, rapid attack. The estimate of resupply requirements was far too small. For example, a shortage of radio batteries was never corrected. There was insufficient time to sort and separate equipment and supplies adequately. Consequently, there were mix-ups, with Marine uniforms getting into Army dumps and Army supplies showing up in Marine dumps. It was after the beach confusion at Saipan that the Navy decided a permanent Corps shore party should be organized. It would be solely responsible for the movement of all supplies from the beach to the dumps and for the subsequent issue to the divisions. Tactical lessons learned were also new to the Central Pacific War. Instead of a small atoll, the battle had been one of movement on a sizable landmass, and it was further complicated by the numerous caves and the defensive systems they provided for the Japanese. The enemy had defended caves before, but never on such a large scale. On Saipan, these caves were both natural and man-made. Often natural vegetation gave them excellent camouflage. Some had steel doors which could be opened for an artillery piece or machine gun to fire, and then retreat behind the door before return fire could take effect. The flame-throwing tanks could reach many of these caves and so proved very useful. Unfortunately, their range was limited on Saipan, but this was later improved. Thus it was that the hard experiences on Saipan led to a variety of changes which paid valuable dividends in saving American lives in the future Pacific campaigns. And the loss of the island was a strategic strike from which the Japanese never recovered, as the United States drove forward to ultimate victory. End of Chapter 8. End of Breaching the Marianas, The Battle for Saipan, by John C. Chapin. Read by Aaron Bennett.